After running thousands of different labs for my ADHD patients, these are by far the top 10 deficiencies I will see with my ADHD patients when I run these labs. And you'll be surprised that one of them is not dopamine. Yeah, dopamine is not the main culprit that I see as a deficiency. It's probably about 50% of the problem, but all these other ones tend to show up as more so as a deficiency than dopamine. And the very first one still has to do with the dopamine pathway process of making dopamine, but it's an excitatory neurotransmitter known as phenylethylalanine. Now, this is the very beginning of the whole dopamine pathway that helps make dopamine. And if this is low, it's going to cause symptoms of lack of motivation, focus, and drive. Now, by far, whenever I'm testing for this is probably about 90% of the people that I will test this on will tend to have this issue. So it's definitely, I would say, the top one out of all of these. Now, the rest of this list isn't in any particular order because it kind of varies, but definitely will show up more so of seeing these deficient than I will see with dopamine. And the next one still has to do with the dopamine pathway, and that is tyrosine. Tyrosine helps make L-DOPA, and then L-DOPA helps make dopamine. And what is interesting about tyrosine is it is a non-essential amino acid, but what is an essential amino acid is phenylalanine that helps make tyrosine. So a lot of times it is the enzymes, the conversion of making tyrosine becomes more of the issue. So it's a combination of both of these that I tend to always have to address, and does help make improvements when we do address that and find out that that is the problem. Now, we will see deficiencies more so than just only in the dopamine pathway, but also with serotonin and GABA. But what helps make all these different neurotransmitters is there's certain cofactors that need to be used, is what it's called ingredients, to help make and build and modulate these different neurotransmitters. And one of the biggest ones is vitamin B6. And it's something I will see creep up being deficiency so often with people with ADHD, along with all the different B vitamins. And a lot of these different B vitamins tend to also help support, build, and modulate different neurotransmitters. And so if these are deficient, you could still have the issues of focus, motivation, and drive, and all the different symptoms you get with ADHD. And so I will usually always want to supplement like a B complex that have all the activated form of B vitamins, but vitamin B6 by far is definitely the one that's the highest, and it's the most important one for all the different neurotransmitter pathways than any other type of vitamin B. Now, number 4 is another important cofactor for these different neurotransmitters, especially dopamine, and that is vitamin D3. Now, about 50% of the population around the world is known to be vitamin D deficient. I would say it's a lot higher than this because there is definitely an ideal range of having good vitamin D levels, because this can contribute to your fatigue, focus issues, brain fog, but also what's important about vitamin D3, it helps with your immune system. But like I said before, it is a very important cofactor that helps make dopamine. If you're low on this, it makes it very difficult for you to build and modulate dopamine and other different neurotransmitters. Now, the 5th one, this one I would say is also has to do with cofactors that are used to help and build and modulate different neurotransmitters as well. And that is zinc. And zinc is another one that I will see always tend to be deficient with people with ADHD, especially adults with ADHD. And a lot of times it's just because their diet is not the greatest, and so they're not getting enough zinc in their diet. So therefore they might have to supplement that to help improve those levels. And another really big one, and this is also very important with the dopamine pathway, is iron. Now, iron by itself, if you're iron deficient and have anemia, guess what happens is you will have symptoms that are very similar to ADHD, that you will feel mental drained, focus issues, brain fog issues, and you will also have lack of motivation and drive. So it's always good to look at something like iron, and it seems to be always a problem I will see when I'm running these tests. And the 7th one, this one's really big too, and I see it also as a big problem with adults with ADHD, and that is testing for your omega-3 levels. Now, omega-3 is really important for the brain, but what I do see as a problem is both EPA and also DHEA. Now, DHEA is specific for the brain, to helping protect the brain and nutrients for the brain, whereas EPA is more for cardiovascular health. But both of them tend to be deficient with my patients that have ADHD or suspect that they have ADHD. Now, there's lots of different nutrient deficiencies I'm talking about here. So how do you figure out if you have these deficiencies or different deficiencies that could be contributing to your ADHD? Well, you should download my lab protocol that I have for adults, that for people who have ADHD or suspect they have ADHD. So you should download that lab protocol in the description below. Now, the 8th one that I see that is very deficient, very common, especially with adults with ADHD, is cortisol. Now, why is cortisol so important when it comes to the ADHD brain? Because cortisol is what gives us energy. It's what gets us up in the morning, but at least enough to keep you moving and having focus throughout the day, because cortisol also can impact your focus as well. If it's too low, it's going to be very difficult to have that mental capacity throughout the day. But the other thing that cortisol tends to also impact is your sleep as well. So this might not be a deficiency, but sometimes cortisol levels can spike and cause you stress and anxiety and impact your sleep. So you always want to have a good balance of your cortisol. But what I usually will see as more of a problem is it tends to be deficient, especially with adults. It's what we call adrenal insufficiency syndrome. So usually we want to use some supportive adrenal support to help improve those levels. Now, I haven't completely forgotten about the dopamine pathway, because it definitely is a problem. It just isn't so much so it being dopamine specifically being deficient, but there's other different neurotransmitters that I do see tend to be deficient more so than dopamine. And that is being norepinephrine and epinephrine. Both of these are so vital when it comes to managing your stress. And so people with ADHD tend to be very high stress, so they have a hard time managing their stress. And so I will see epinephrine and norepinephrine both deficient and low. And this definitely can impact not only your stress levels, but also can impact your motivation and your focus as well, because it is part of the dopamine pathway process. And if you're like any of my patients that have taken several different medications, stimulant medications, either Adderall or Ritalin, it's like, what do you do then? Because a lot of times these medications tend to be the culprit of causing the deficiencies of all these different micronutrient levels that I just was discussing about. And so it becomes this vicious cycle and becomes a big problem. And so if you're looking for ways to use alternative uses of improving the dopamine pathway and helping improving your ADHD symptoms, then you should watch this video next, where I talk about the 5 strongest Adderall or stimulant medication alternatives that you could be using that helps with this whole pathway. So watch this video next.